What's going on, world? Guess what? I have officially let the world know that I got a new boo bae, and it is called AI, artificial intelligence. However, before my new boo bae showed up, they got me up all night long playing with it. I knew my boy, Alex Camilo, we met in Wichita. Was it Wichita, Kansas?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. From Agent Inner Circle. And here's what's funny. So Alex is my tech guy. I just need y'all to know that. For all things tech related, for building out formulas and Excel spreadsheets, I am sliding into Alex DM to get help because we always viewed it that I was the social media girl, but you were the tech guy, right? You and Craig. And so I am so elated, right? Because I know enough just to be dangerous about artificial intelligence, but we have both stayed up numerous nights since ChatGPT hit the streets. And I want you to tell us your background and how long have they been AIing us?
Sure. So AI, the concepts of AI, and I'll give my background kind of later to that because obviously I came into this way later. But the concepts of AI started back in the 1940s. The very, very first discussions around AI were back in like 1946, 1947, 1940, right in that range. And there were a bunch of people in Britain who were starting some of the earliest builds of computers. And at that point in time started the concepts of AI. What would it mean for a computer to be smart enough to be called artificial intelligence? And how does that all work? And what sort of testing are we going to do with that? So obviously I was not born at that point. So I came into the story much, much later than that. This is probably 8 years ago, something along those lines. The company that I owned at the time before we sold to Lone Wolf, that company, we were a mobile first, everything mobile technology company. And we wanted to build a voice search because we saw that folks in real estate were on the road. They wanted to search and easily search by voice. So we built the very, very first voice search in the real estate industry in the world. And to do that, we ended up building a natural language processor. Now, it was not nearly to the depths and levels of the artificial intelligence that we see today or the machine learning that we see today, but it was a very early natural language processor. And what I mean by that is, a lot of people, when they're doing a voice search, you'll ask it to find a property in, let's say my backyard, Burlington, Vermont, right? It will just do an open keyword search of how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, how many things you're looking for, and just return all the properties. The one we built went far enough that it would actually start filling in your criteria into the form. So you could say, I'm looking for a 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom home in Burlington, Vermont, under $800,000 with a patio, pool, and garage. And it would actually fill into the form each one of those things that you said, and intelligently process your language and start to break that up and put it where it needs to go. Now, at that point in time, that really piqued my interest for getting artificial intelligence to write property descriptions just from the data, just from the MLS data, not having to, think about a property description, just having the machine do it. And then fast forward a number of years, and we're starting to get to that point where it's getting close to that level of technology where it can just in an automated fashion, kind of write that content for you. So it's been interesting for me to see, being able to work on some of the early, very, very early development of some of this stuff, at least in the real estate industry, to this point where we're really seeing it take off, which is so much fun to see.
So when we start talking about AI and why now, right? Because in the past, essentially 90 days, the world has changed, right? With essentially ChatGPT becoming publicly available. And then people like Gary Vee and Charlene Johnson talking about it's getting ready to change everything. So I feel like an early adapter of ChatGPT because I started using it within 2 weeks of Gary V being very serious, right? In a video.
Yeah.
And once I clicked on, that's when my sleep was disrupted because I just started going back to bed, 60, 75 days after first using this tool, because I'm like, oh my God, this is going to change how we do everything. But one thing that you and I discussed, besides the fact that this is machine learning and the more we use it, the better it becomes. You and I decided that we needed to really start at the beginning because the question a lot of realtors have been asking me is, so how hard is it to use? And I tell them it's a chat bot. It's as simply as you using text, right?
Yep.
Text is everything, but it's not just any old text. And so today I wanted us to kind of elaborate on prompts and tone. So what's a prompt to you? Give me a prompt that one might use in real estate.
Sure. So a prompt, in a very simple breakdown, is a request for the artificial intelligence to do something for you. Whether that be answer a question, whether it be you're commanding it to write something for you, it's simply you're making a request to the AI to complete a task for you. So, for example, you might say, I want you to write a property description about a 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom home in a certain area and list out some of the features. It will write that content for you. Alternatively, you could take something you've already written and ask it to rewrite it. So if you've used content in the past and you want to freshen it up or update it, you can go in, take that content you've already done and say, hey, rewrite this for me. Those sorts of things make it very simple to reutilize content and streamline what you're doing to make it way, way easier for the artificial intelligence to create content for you. Now, those are some basic ones. You can do everything from have it brainstorm things for you, to list things in order of importance for you, to analyze data for you. It really is kind of open-ended in what you can request from it. And it's really about building good requests and figuring out how to request correctly so that you get the information back that you want.
So one of the prompts that I wrote was provide me a list of 8 interview questions to ask a for sale by owner. And here's what it spit out in less than 4 seconds. What is the reason for selling the property? What is the current condition of the property and have any updates or repairs been made recently? How long has the property been on the market? And the list of questions keeps going. Now, most real estate professionals be like, okay, so I have those questions. But then what I decided to do was I wanted it to list 8 objections a for sale by owner might have to list in their home with an agent. It provided me 8, but the first one says, I don't want to pay a commission. So here's where life gets interesting. I said, how would an agent overcome objection number 1? And it said an agent can overcome the objection of not wanting to pay commission by explaining the value and benefits that they bring to the table. But then I said, provide me a script to use to overcome objection number 1. So when I'm thinking about this as a tool, I'm consistently telling my fellow realtors, I want you to start looking at your ROTI, your return on time invested. And no, I don't believe that AI tools will replace us because we're in a society now post-pandemic where people really yearn for human connection. Like tools are available, but what really people want that human interaction. I would like to see them leverage these AI tools essentially as a no or low cost assistant that they're training, right? Now, here's what hit me, and I want to see where you go with this. instantly I start thinking that every real estate professional team and small to medium brokerage has failed, most have failed to develop SOPs, standards of practice. What would it look like to get AI to write those standards of practice as a company? But this might be our $1 billion idea, right? And sell them to organizations who don't know how to write them, right?
Yeah.
How much easier could life get if you had standard operating procedures or principles for your business?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the wonderful part about that too is with an AI that's intelligent about the operating procedures it just created, you could then ask it questions about those OPs. So then you're essentially training your agents can very quickly go, well, what's our operating procedure on this? How do we do that? And it starts interacting with people. And that's one of the reasons it sort of has Google so scared, is that with Google, like, let's say you're doing the research that you just did. With Google, you could do every one of those pieces of research that you just did. They would just take you longer, right? You could go research that same thing, but essentially all that AI is doing is aggregating the top set of results and then overlaying them and figuring out which ones show up more often than the others. So when it returns it, number one is the most valuable thing because it's, listed in 1,000 articles, where number two is only listed in 950 articles, or number three is only 900, and so on down the list. That's essentially how the AI works, is it comes up with the most probable answers and then gives you it in the order of probability. And there are different ways it does that, but that's essentially how that whole thing works.
Now, when you just said probability, I went back to mentally to undergrad and grad school, to statistics, right? The probability of something occurring between 0 and 1. So what I'm hearing you say is that one of the reasons that Google is scared, and I never thought of it like this, is because through artificial intelligence, it's taken all of that data that Google has, right? It's been the keeper of data for a lot of people, right?
Yep.
And they're giving it to us in the probability that it would occur, thereby meaning that Google has to implement AI, right? To take all of that data to make it simpler for us to get it, but we still got to have a good prompt.
Exactly. I mean, what's funny to me is how many years have we been teaching how to write a Google search? People still don't even know how to write a Google search with all of the advanced tools and all of the different things you can use in it and so on and so forth, right? So it's just that it's an aggregator and a much easier way for people to interface with that same amount of data that is just an enormous amount of data. And it's nice because it kind of solves that problem of it kind of does two things that I worry about. One of which is there's no attribution. So Google gives me a response and then says, okay, this person says this works for them, and you can have some way of doing that. Well, AI is good and it's bad in that, like, it will tell you what the most popular thing to do is. But does that mean it's the best thing to do?
Well, let me say this. I wasn't necessarily thinking that Google was ever giving me the best way to do it. They were giving me a variety of ways to do it. But there is a Chrome browser plug-in called Web Chat GPT. And what it does, it actually gives the attribution to the source, because what it is essentially doing, ChatGPT is currently built out, I think, till 2021. So we shouldn't make any assumptions that it knows anything from 2021 to the present day. What Web Chat GPT as a Chrome browser extension does is pull in the information from 2021 to the present, and it actually gives you how it is sourcing it. So when I am doing a search I can turn it, I can toggle it on and off, but I can actually get references to what it's saying and an order. And then I
Right.
also get the chat GPT without the web chat GPT to display, and they give it to me essentially as two result fields, right?
Yep.
Which most people, they like, well, I can't get data after this date. And I'm telling everybody, there is a Chrome browser extension out here to save you. I would probably
Yep.
venture to say 5 new ones every single day.
Yeah. Well, and there are new ones coming out every day. There are two things that I pause with on that, on the real-time ones and the up-to-date data ones. So in two things. So one is when the data is aggregated, like we're talking about, and we're giving sources. I know what you're talking about with the attribution of specific written content in terms of quotable content. More what I mean is in a big picture sense. When let's say there's like 1,000 people, 1,000 marketing experts, and 70% of the marketing experts, we'll put experts in quotes, 70% of them are online making noise about how you need to farm cold leads. And then 30% of them are making noise about, following up with your sphere of influence or doing all these other things. Well, if you ask ChatGPT, what's the best way to make money in real estate? They're going to tell you farming cold leads, because 70% of the people out there, right, are doing that, and 30% are over here. So this whole volume versus quantity in the statistical probability thing kind of becomes challenging.
Ooh. Well, one, I'm glad that you clarified, because I totally understand. So now it's kind of like the weighted information. So the older, the longer doesn't mean that it's the most relevant now, but it definitely could skew that way because it's so much data on the 70%, which might be an antiquated way or not the most modern way in which to do it. Right?
Exactly. Yep, exactly.
Uh-oh. Well, one, you just opened. I didn't think about that. Oh, sweet. Yes. So that means we got to write more content, one. Right? We got to write more content on the new methods to help level the playing field for the future.
Exactly. And that's where custom training of models comes in. So OpenAI, and I'm sure you've seen this playing around behind the scenes, but you can train the OpenAI model to write for your organization specifically. So let's say you have 500 property descriptions you've written in the past. You can take those 500 and train the OpenAI model to write just like you write. Or if there are new marketing methods that are coming out, you can go in and train the model and say, hey, these are actually better now than this because of X, Y, and Z. But it takes very specific training of the model. And that's why I also worry about the up-to-date data. And the reason being is that every time we've seen AI in any way interact with data that is currently up to date, sadly, they've become racist and misogynistic. So as an example, Microsoft put out their Twitter, their API or their AI on Twitter a couple years ago. Gosh, I'm blanking on her name, what they named her. Oh, this is going to bug me now. I'll look it up in a second. But they put this AI on Twitter, and what it was supposed to do is people were supposed to be able to tweet and interact with it. But it was picking up live data up to that minute and then using that data to try to keep learning. Well, people on Twitter started trying to troll this AI bot to the point where the next thing you knew, it was putting out really racist and misogynistic messages, and they pulled it offline immediately. And it was like, what do we do, right? But it was because it was training off of the data it was getting, and it didn't necessarily know any better. OpenAI has done a good job of putting some things to combat that. But anytime that you're taking in data to an AI model and you're not pausing before you train it and then unleash it into the wild, there are really some concerns that go into that. So I always kind of pause when we're talking about totally up to date AI, because I don't think we're quite there yet. The tech will get there, but we're not quite there yet.
So last week, Lee Brown and we presented at the same event. And of course, we had an AI discussion. And that is because numerous realtors they're being flagged with fair housing violations because they're allowing AI to write their property descriptions. Now, get this. They're allowing them to write the property descriptions without editing them or reading them, and simply copying and pasting them with the fair housing violation terminology inside of it. So let me say this. It is our responsibility to proofread everything and to delete any content that is a violation of license law or the realtor's code of ethics. It's irresponsible, right? To not proof your content. And I'm thinking to myself, now, that's a special type of lazy when a system saves you 90% of the time. And we have the unmitigated gall to not proof it, right? Before we copy and paste it, right? I did say copy and paste it, right? And so what I'm thinking in the world of real estate is that, and I haven't had a chance, but I'm going to test this in a prompt. I want to know if we took a property description and it spewed out information that either violated license law or the realtor's code of ethics, can we then come back and say, paraphrase the above to be in accordance with real estate license law and the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics, and if it would take that terminology out?
So you're in luck. You don't have to stay up late thinking about this because I've already tested that.
You've already. so what were your results?
So, and funny enough, it's funny you say it because, as I said at the beginning, my start in this was, 8 years ago, thinking about property descriptions and could we get this to intelligently create property descriptions? So there are two different ways you can go about this. One of which is when you build the prompt itself, you can specifically tell it to not reference any fair housing terms related to and mention no family, no. But almost every property description I've had it write has said perfect for the whole family, or some reference to whole family, perfect for family, whatever it might be. Almost every one that I've tested without any direction to the prompt, you can do that. Then there's a second component to this. So the OpenAI API has a separate endpoint for what is called their moderation API, which does not cost you any extra in terms of tokens or things like that when it comes to running it against their AI system. And that moderation API allows you to do exactly what you're talking about, which is take the content that was created and then moderate it against a certain set of terms to make sure that it's not coming back with content that we might not want. One thing that's really interesting to me on this, though, that I think we really kind of got to pay attention to a little bit. Why do you think the AI is writing that?
I'm going to go back to what you said earlier. I wrote it down because of attribution. And historically, for so many years, that was the terminology in which we were including in other property descriptions, which now means that people had already been violating fair housing and license law.
Yep.
Oh, yes, based on that attribution.
Exactly. So that blows me away that people are out there being like, oh, well, the technology is going to no, the only reason the technology is doing it is because people did it for that long. Like, it learned from humans. You're doing that. Like, if anything, in the future, this gives us a better way to regulate that so that we know we can moderate that content instead of a human, all these random humans who that's the perfect example that they're doing those violations anyway. Like, it just, that whole topic blows my mind.
I'm glad that you pointed that out because I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm having a lot of issues mentally right now because my courses at this point don't have to be approved for continuing education, and not as a keynote, right? Because most of them wouldn't meet the time duration anyway. With that being said, I am 100% aggravated with licensing bodies who do not approve technology courses because now they have the average realtor 20 to 30 years behind, right? We can go back to 1995 when NAR had its first technology course. Well, if NAR is offering technology courses back in 1995, so should licensed bodies across the country.
Yep.
Because essentially at this point, the education they're providing, if it does not include technology, they're dummying us down. And how do we serve through ADA, American with Disabilities Act, the visual and the audio impaired if we don't bring in technology, right? So I'm having some big issues right now because I believe that we continue to deliver antiquated education, even like us having this conversation about attribution. Most people, you know this already, we're blaming it on the technology, but actually we have to blame it on the previous examples.
Exactly.
Not the tech. The technology is letting you know that what the previous examples were.
Yep, exactly. And it gives us a path to be able to correct this stuff, which I think is fantastic. But yeah, I see that too. And it gets me so frustrated because people blame it on it's like, oh, it's bad tech. You're like, no, it's not. It's bad humans. We're the bad ones here. Like, come on, folks. Yeah.
Ooh, see, I knew I was going to learn some new stuff today. Now, there is a book that I did purchase called Words That Sell. And the reason is because not only do we need to have these prompts right, we need to also have a tone for the prompt.
Yep.
Right. And when I think about this book, one thing, my son is a second generation realtor. And
I love his content, by the way. I see his stuff come through.
Thank you. And so he had me to do I think it was a direct email campaign to us, to senior homeowners, right? Because he does very well. They like him. He calls. They love that, right? So the first time that I asked it, it says, because you're getting older. That was like the first sentence. I was like, oh God, this boy will never get any business. This is the reason for proofing your prompts, guys.
Yep.
So I said, oh, he can never tell somebody older. They're getting older. Like that is not the thing that we want to hear. So I went back, and because I have Words That Sell, I wanted to change the tone to a respectful tone. The next sentence was like, you bought your home in order to create a legacy. I said, oh, I love the terminology, right? But not only was it a good prompt, it was the tone that caters to the audience in which you are trying to attract. And so you can definitely change the tone. You want to make sure that you're asking it to write prompts according to licensed law. You definitely want to make sure that you're adhering to fair housing. What are some other issues that people believe is the tech issue, but it might be the human issue? Anything else come to mind?
Yeah, there's a few things. So one thing I'll let folks know about ChatGPT versus the other tools is that when you're using ChatGPT, it's just an open command line prompt where you're typing in and you're chatting and getting a response from the chat. When you go use the OpenAI API to build a tool behind the scenes, there are a bunch more settings that the AI lets you tweak. And based on those settings, you get a much different response from the AI. So ChatGPT, for example, only has one. So there are like 4 or 5 main settings. ChatGPT has one of those, like configuration set.
Yeah.
And the rest of them are just stuck, hard, blank, you can't do anything, that sort of stuff. So changing those settings can drastically change. Like, one of the settings, I'll give you an example. One of the settings, if you scroll it the entire way to the left and you ask it to write a sentence, it might use the same word 4 or 5 times in the sentence. If you slide it the entire way to the right, it might not use the same word twice for 3 pages. Right? That makes a big difference when it comes to how your content is written, because there's a balance there. Same thing with some of the other features that you can set, some of the what are called frequency or presence penalties. So these settings can make such a big difference that it takes a little bit of time to tweak and play with them and get them to where you want for the content and the kind of tone that you're going to get back, or what sort of content you might be preparing and using. So even beyond even just ChatGPT, where you say, I want it to be respectful, or I want it to be, these different things, there are actually a bunch of other settings behind the scenes. And the way I think about it is kind of like, well, 2 things. I'll give 2 analogies here. So one of which is I think about the prompts sort of like recipes. And I think about it in the sense of, we can all use a recipe, right? And different folks have different experience levels in the kitchen. But just because I have a recipe and a 4-star Michelin chef has a recipe doesn't mean we're necessarily going to make the same dish. That's sort of the concept of AI as well, where based on the prompts, based on how you're using the kitchen and using those tools, what you get out of it is going to be very different from 2 people putting into, using the technology a little bit differently. So I really think it comes down to more of an understanding of the usage of technology and figuring out, 1, what those recipes are, but then 2, well, how do I match those recipes up to me and what I'm doing? And then the other thing that I always think about with this is, we have this notion of AI where it's like AI is one person, or we're talking to one thing, but we're not. Every one of those different settings and tweaks and prompts and information you give it means that essentially a different person is responding to you. So we can't think about this as just like, oh, AI is AI and we get a response and that's it. That's not how that works. We change a few of those settings. Now I went from talking to Alex to talking to Marky. And we're going to get 2 totally different responses for the content that we want because it's Marky versus Alex. And neither of them may be wrong. Both of them could be amazing, could be fantastic, but they're going to be different. And that's where that individualism starts coming in. And I think that's one of the things we see a lot, where people think like, oh, well, 10 agents all put in and get a property description. They're all going to be the same. What's the difference between them? They are not, right? They're not going to be the same. And that's where I think people are kind of thinking about it a little bit differently, where they're going like, oh, it's just this one AI, this one person I'm getting no.
So I know that you are a baker, right? And I definitely love the example about the cook, because this is what instantly I thought about, right? If you and Steven, my husband, were going to make the same identical cookie, the likelihood is the sugar would come from 2 different places because you wouldn't buy the same brand sugar, right? Your butter would come from different places, and both of you could use salted butter, right? But it's going to taste just a little different, right?
Yep.
If you go to Whole Food to get the butter versus going to Aldi, it should be a different butter, right? Then you both have a mixer, right? You could put it on the high speed, but those aren't the same 2 high speeds, right? And then we go and we get our cookie sheet and we decide to spray it. Well, it just says spray it, right? My husband might use avocado oil. You might use your favorite oil. But now when it comes to heating the oven, our 400 might be 405 and your 400 might be 395, which then will change the texture of the cookie, right? So same identical recipe that 500 people could cook, and it could be something slightly different. because
Yep.
no one is going to have the same sugar, the same butter, the same brown sugar, the same chocolate chips. What else we got? The same pan, the same oven, and it's going to all have a little different variation to it. Okay, you know what?
That's why they fly water from New York to Florida for pizza.
Who does that?
No, they're legit. There are pizza shops in Florida who, because water makes one of the biggest differences when you're making dough, when you're making pizza dough.
Really?
So there are people who, legit. There are people who fly water from New York to Florida so they can make the same pizza so that the dough tastes the same because the water's the same and the water's different in Florida.
Well, I never knew that. But now that makes, but it makes sense, right? If they believe the water is, maybe they think the water in Florida might have a little too much salt that might offset the tomato, and they think they might need to use sugar to sweeten it up. I'm just saying, I do not like sugar in my spaghetti, just so that you know, but I definitely know that we should add a little sugar to your tomato to cut the acidity, I believe it is. So, okay. So, Alex, how do people work with you? Because this is going to be, one, you're a repeat guest. So I want to thank you for being a repeat guest, but that lets you know how brilliant I think you are, right?
Oh my gosh.
And this is going to be one of many conversations around AI, because look, I plan on AI retiring us from the real estate industry. So this is going to be the first of a long line of conversations. But tell people about your company and how to connect with you and to learn more about AI.
Yeah, first, I'm honored to be here. So thank you. Having me back as a repeat guest is truly an honor. So I really appreciate it. Marky and I have been friends for a long time. So this is so much fun. To find out about me, Agent Inner Circle. You can either check us out at agentinnercircle.com, or you can go to our Facebook group or Facebook page. There's about 3,000 or so in our Facebook group. There's amazing conversations happening all the time. Marky's in there. We always like to have a lot of fun. And we give away a ton of free content. So our differentiator is, we write an article on how to write a great sales letter. We give you a template sales letter for free, that kind of stuff. And it's just a great and free and fun community. So agentinnercircle.com or Agent Inner Circle on Facebook.
Wow. So one, Alex, I want to thank you for always being willing to share. And AI, we are just starting to scratch the surface, but we look forward to bringing you more information on artificial intelligence and ChatGPT. Thank you, Alex.
Awesome. Thanks, Marky.